Hey guys, this is Jeff Stanek with Figured Out Baseball. Got a really good Figured Out Baseball podcast today that I'm excited to be joined by a former colleague of mine, someone I used to share a locker room with, which I'm really excited about. I love having guys on that I know personally and have a chance to reconnect with some people. We're being joined today by Graham Johnson, who's currently a pitching coach in the Houston Astros minor league organization. He and I were together for a couple years at Morehead State in Kentucky. I'll give you Coach Johnson's full background before we jump into questions with him. He is a North Henderson, Illinois native, played his collegiate baseball at Culver-Stockton College and NAIA school in Canton, Missouri. The team was very successful while he was there. They won the conference championship 3 times, went to 3 regionals and 1 super regional. So definitely a really good team while he was there. 2008 was his first chance to be on the field as a coach. He coached for 1 season at Culver-Stockton. 2009 and 10, he spent 2 springs as a graduate assistant at Lindenwood, an NAIA school in St. Charles, Missouri. They have since transitioned to NCAA Division II, but they were NAIA at that time. While he was at Lindenwood, he coached pitchers and outfielders. He also got his master's degree while he was there in strength and conditioning. In 2011, he was an assistant pitching coach at Western Illinois, a Division I school in Macomb, Illinois. Then from 2012 through 2017, he was the pitching coach at Morehead State, which is a Division I school in Morehead, Kentucky. While he was at Morehead for 3 straight seasons, his pitchers set the school record for strikeouts. In 2015, the team went to the NCAA Regional for the first time since 1984. The team set the school record that year with 38 wins, also set the school record with 18 saves. 2016 team set the school and conference record with 554 strikeouts. They also had a starting pitcher that year that set the school single-season record with 130 strikeouts. He was one of 3 pitchers drafted that year. That pitcher that set that record was a 10th rounder. They also had a 15th rounder and a 36th rounder that year. His last year there, 2017, they had a 6th round draft pick, the highest draft pick in Morehead State in a long time. I don't know how long that dates back, but the highest draft pick in quite some time at Morehead. Then 2018 was his first season coaching in affiliated pro ball. He was the pitching coach that year for the Quad Cities River Bandits, the low-A team in the Astros organization. That year, the team led the league in strikeouts and ERA. And listen to this, they had 1,514 team strikeouts that year. The next team in the league had 1,263 strikeouts. So they led the league by about 250 strikeouts. And that strikeout number is also actually the all-time single-season pitching staff record in minor league baseball. Pretty amazing. 2019, he was the Double-A pitching coach, got moved up a couple levels, was the pitching coach for the Corpus Christi Hooks. The team, again, led the league in strikeouts. This year, going into the 2021 season, he is slated to be the Double-A pitching coach again. Obviously, the Astros like him a lot if they bumped him up, and he's obviously doing very good work in the organization. Coach Johnson, appreciate you being here today, man.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Should have some fun on here.
So, typically, Graham, I like to start with something from a podcast or from the bio that stands out, something that kind of catches my eye. But in your case, because, you and I spent some time together, I'd like to kind of ask about, how things went when you left Morehead to join the Astros organization. I felt like when we were coaching that you were a guy that could fit into pro ball pretty well just because of your skill set, because of the things that you focused on, things that you were good at. I thought, those are things that probably could translate to a pro organization. And you were, I guess I'd say maybe in the first wave of college coaches that were being hired into professional baseball. Can you kind of talk about that a little bit? Just first of all, what made you interested? And how you went about it. Did you apply? Did you get a call from somebody that got you interested? And then once you were in there, I'd love to hear about just what the conversation was like, and if you have any idea just, what exactly on your resume or your skill set helped you to get that job.
Yeah, can definitely talk on and shed some light on that. I guess the first thing is I didn't really think I'd have a shot at pro ball, just and obviously it's changed and pretty dramatically just in this recent past. But it kind of always felt like you had to play pro ball to be able to have a chance to kind of get in that coaching world. So obviously was able to ride that wave of some regime changes and wanting to kind of change the way player development was done, especially at the minor league level. So I was able to kind of be at the right place at the right time when that wave was coming in. But what really got it started was a good buddy of mine, Dylan Lawson, who I believe you probably remember. He was at SEMO and was at Morehead State before you guys came on. He had been with the Astros for a season and then left to go back to Mizzou, but then he was only going to be at Mizzou. I think he was only back there for 1 year as the hitting coach, and then was going back to the Astros. And he kind of randomly just, we were texting or we were on the phone and kind of just gave me the pitching coordinator at the time's email and said, hey, I told him that I'm giving you his email. And he's like, just shoot your resume over and, at least he has it. Nothing may come of it, but, it can't hurt anything. So I sent my resume, didn't apply or anything like that, just sent a message. And, at that time it was Doug White was the pitching coordinator's name. So sent my resume over and didn't really expect anything of it. And I think it was like maybe a couple hours later, he had emailed me back and just said, hey, Graham, appreciate it. Would love to chat sometime. And I think it was probably like a week later, we ended up connecting on the phone, and like it wasn't really an interview. It was just kind of like, what I think we're probably going to be doing here is just talking baseball, talking pitching. And we ended up talking for like an hour and a half, 2 hours, but there was really never anything formal, and it just kind of ended. And then, the process just kind of kept evolving from that point forward, and still never actually had to like really apply, but kind of felt like I was maybe going to get an offer. And it was right before, and hopefully I'm not bringing up a contract, but it was right before the 2017 playoffs. And they got put on a hiring freeze. They couldn't make any offers. They wanted to wait until the playoffs were over, which of course they then go on to win the World Series and obviously have to do everything after that. So it ended up getting extended like another, 6 weeks to 2 months. And then finally got the job offer. And that's kind of how it went from there. But it was a little bit, I wanted to be as faithful to Mac and Brownie and those guys as I could. But the whole time it kind of felt like I was going to get the offer. I just had to kind of be patient and wait for it. And eventually did. But, Mac was able to kind of have his ducks in a row to be able to make a quick hire once I was gone. But I did kind of feel I was growing increasingly, concerned of, the timeline, not wanting to put Morehead State in a bad spot to make that hire. But that's kind of the shortest version of how it all went down.
I think it's pretty cool, and I love the fact that I've talked with Dylan, several times just over the years, and I know that what's his position now with the Yankees? Is he their hitting coordinator?
Yeah, he's the minor league hitting coordinator for the Yankees.
Okay, so he and I have talked a bunch of times. I think that's such an interesting path. I've talked with several other minor league coaches on this podcast who have said similar things. They knew somebody who knew somebody, or they kind of ran into somebody, and it was there. I haven't been many instances of guys that I've talked to that have just, there's a job posted and they apply and they kind of got it blindly. I think it's how a lot of jobs, probably a lot of different levels are. Do you know exactly, Graham, from your conversations, what about your resume or what about what you did or focused on or accomplished as a pitching coach, what made you attractive to the Astros organization?
Yeah, I think definitely coming from like a background of trying to develop was a big thing. Myself, but obviously most importantly, the pitching staff that you're currently working with at that point. Obviously, he was able to kind of look at the track record a little bit and see that our pitchers were getting better, guys starting to get drafted. But if I was going to boil it down to kind of one thing, it would be probably like having a growth mindset of, just because we've done some things, that have helped our guys get better. It wasn't like, okay, this is our program now. This is how we're doing it. It was continuing to try to push the envelope to help guys get better. And if you were going to boil it down to one phrase or one thing, I think it was having a growth mindset. That's a big thing within the Astros philosophy and kind of how we do everything. So I think that was probably the one thing that really clicked with Doug. And then once Doug actually got promoted kind of in that process, so I kind of got shifted on to Pete Patilla, who is basically our assistant GM at this point. And that's kind of what it came down to was, I would say, having the growth mindset, or them being able to sense that that's where I was coming from a mental perspective of trying to develop guys.
And a growth mindset means what exactly, Graham?
Like, just not, I view it as not settling with, the way you've always done things. Is you're constantly trying to learn, you're trying to evolve, your process, but then the process that you're going to, put your players through, put your pitchers through, for me, to try to help them achieve, their goals and dreams. Because as more information comes to light, whether it's data or anything, mental skills, being able to create a process for the guys that you're working with to help them get where they want to be. That's kind of how I view it.
Just along those lines, and maybe, I don't know if you remember this part of the conversation or if you had this exact conversation, but I'm curious, what kind of things are the most important? Obviously, you develop pitchers at Morehead State. We had a bunch of guys that came in. I mean, all those pitchers that I mentioned that got drafted for Morehead, none of them were drafted out of high school. I don't think any of them I'm not sure any of them had more than like one or two other Division I offers coming out of high school. So obviously they grew and developed a lot once you got them. But was it, more than that, like as the overall team? Obviously you developed some individuals that stood out. But as far as the whole group, the whole pitching staff, do you have any idea? I mean, was it, the fact that like the team ERA kind of got where it got? Was it, I know you're not a huge ERA guy, but obviously that's just a stat that throughout the season, typically if you have a better pitching staff, your ERA is going to be better than it would be if you didn't have as good of pitchers. Was it the strikeout numbers? Was it your track record of keeping guys healthy? Because that's something I always noted at Morehead. We really had you really had a great track record of keeping guys healthy and on the field. We really didn't have, at least the time I was there, and even the couple years after when I was following the team pretty closely, because a lot of the guys I recruited were still there, very few arm injuries, especially serious arm injuries that require any sort of surgery. Like, are any of those things, one or another, you think maybe more important? I'm asking just, for my own curiosity, but also if there's someone listening to this that would love to take a path similar to yours, just kind of curious what sort of things stand out to pro organizations, if you know. I'm not sure if you know or not.
Yeah, I think the strikeouts is probably a big thing, and I think if you're going to boil it down a little further, it's like creating the swing and miss, I think is kind of the big thing. When it comes down to it, is that's probably the thing that jumps out on the resume maybe a little bit, that, hey, this is where this guy could bring value. If I had to guess, obviously I've never like just flat out asked Doug that question or Pete that question as to what it was about me. But I would guess that had something to do with it. And then that's kind of where our conversations led. Okay, like I see the strikeout numbers, how are you getting there? Is it velocity? Is it spin? Is it change-ups, locations, all that type of stuff? And the answer was, well, it's all of those things. It's, I think, if someone's out there listening and, it's from a book, and it's probably even a cliche, but like always try to embrace the power of and. It's like we don't have to just think about velocity, or we don't have to just think about location. It's like, yeah, when we're training those two specific things, yeah, we probably do have to isolate it and just think about those things in that particular moment, whether it's a drill or just the environment that we're in that particular situation or setting. Yeah, you have to isolate those things, but you have to embrace. You can get better at both. Maybe not at exactly the same time, but like through your periodization of your training, you can improve both of those things. I think that was the big thing, and it kind of comes back to the growth mindset of like, you don't have to pigeonhole yourself as a pure stuff guy or a pure command guy, or if you are already one of those guys, like you can improve the other spectrum. That's how you're going to make yourself a more complete pitcher. That's how you're going to make yourself a more complete coach. And, our guys, they were wanting to win games at the Division I level at Morehead State, but they were also, chasing that carrot in front of them of wanting to play professionally. So that was the big thing. It's if you're coming from Morehead State, you can't just probably be a one-trick pony. You've got to be able to do multiple things because, there's one thing about the draft and there's one thing about pro ball you see really quickly. It's like there are a ton of really, really talented pitchers out there. So, you've got to find every single way to try to set yourself apart from those guys, because the competition just gets harder and harder, from high school to college to pro ball to the big leagues. Like, it's a tough game, and everybody wants the exact same thing you do. So I think that's kind of where it came from of, I think the swing and miss and being able to create it in as many ways as possible was probably the big thing. That stuck up to them, and it's probably where our conversations went. That probably, I obviously got my foot in the door with the initial email and phone call, but that's probably what allowed the phone calls to continue beyond that.
So how do you create swing and miss? I mean, at the time that you were doing this at Morehead, we didn't have Rapsodo. We didn't have the things that were measuring spin rates and spin axis and things that I'm sure you probably pay a lot of attention to and get a lot of data on now in the Astros organization. So without having that tool, Graham, how do you go about increasing swing and miss? Getting guys' stuff, quote unquote, getting their stuff to be better. What's kind of the process behind that in your mind as a pitching coach?
Yeah, so you've got to try to constantly improve your stuff. One thing that I always came from before we had all this stuff was just it never made sense to me to be a one-trick pony of basically making yourself predictable. And at that time when I came into Morehead State, it's like, okay, I'm looking through our charts, I'm breaking down the percentages, and obviously got a lot of lessons in Excel spreadsheets because I was clueless when I first started that. But our buddy Brownie really helped me out a lot with that, and either creating it for me or helping me learn how to create the spreadsheets. And just basically, the initial thing was usage charts of understanding what is a guy potentially using too much that's maybe not his best pitch, or what is his best pitch that he's not using enough, and trying to marry those two things together, I think was the initial quick adjustment that I was able to make at Morehead State and help the guys in that regard. I would say that was the very first thing, and then from there just kind of tried to step back and look at other programs, whether it be in baseball or, driveline or anything like that, the Jaeger throwing program with long toss, and just try to pull everything that I thought made a lot of sense and then make it Morehead State's program, was the big thing, and just kind of make it all-encompassing and pull everything that I thought was quality for developing guys, or maybe something that didn't quite make sense to me yet. I didn't get into that with our guys because if it didn't make sense to me, I for darn sure wasn't going to be able to explain it in a quality way to help our players understand it. So there was definitely like an evolution each year of adding to what we were trying to do. But if I go back to that initial usage part, most of the time it was our guys were throwing too many fastballs. Whether it was ahead in the count, even in count, behind the count, it's kind of like what you're saying. Usually the reason if a guy's not getting a lot of D1 offers in high school, it's because he's not lighting up the radar guns, which was the case for the majority of guys that we had coming into Morehead State. So it's like, well, if you're not lighting up the radar guns, which back then, we kind of knew a little bit about spin rate and velocity. Those were kind of the two things, It's obviously evolved a lot in the last 4 years beyond that, but those were kind of the things we were looking at. And it's like, okay, if we don't quite have that, we're going to work as hard as we possibly can in these 2 to 4 years that we've got you here to improve that. But while you don't have it, we have to find another avenue to help you get outs and get on the field for Morehead State. So usually it came back down to, slider, curveball, changeup development, and probably specifically the slider while we're at Morehead State.
When you are trying to add a pitch to a guy's repertoire, or a guy has a pitch and is not very good and you feel like you can make it better, in the world without Rapsodo, because I know a lot of our subscribers, a lot of our listeners, that listen to this podcast are high school coaches, and a lot of those high school coaches, at least on a regular basis, don't have access to that stuff. Are you, Graham, just kind of going through several different grips and seeing what works better, maybe trying to manipulate pressure points for a guy? Like, how do you go about either adding a pitch or taking a pitch that's so-so and saying, all right, I think your curveball's got, it's got a potential to be a pretty good pitch, or your slider's got potential to be a pretty good pitch, but we need to, I think we can make it a lot better. What is the process to do that, either to add a pitch or to make a pitch better that's already in the repertoire?
Yeah, so at Morehead State, and I was probably thinking about it wrong, but it allowed for some good things. My thought is, and for those who haven't been to Morehead State or played at Morehead State or anything like that, like it's a hitter's paradise. So I didn't want the ball put in play as often as possible, but along those lines is I thought we needed to constantly pitch down in the zone, because fly balls could get out of the yard very, very easily. So my thought process at that time was I wanted a breaking ball that could better tunnel, which, there's somebody will probably get mad at me for even talking about tunneling, because it's not necessarily something you can really, truly prove, but the technology is kind of getting there. But in my line of thought is I was a big fan of the slider, because that's a breaking ball. In my mind, you could tunnel much more specifically with a fastball down, and get that pitch to a better location where you could get a swing and miss with it. So that's kind of why, the slider was an emphasis there. In terms of teaching it, yeah, it's totally finding a grip that a guy is comfortable with. Obviously, I kind of had one or two that were a little bit of our bread and butter, but there was definitely some guys who were a little bit unorthodox of how we had to go about it. But it's definitely finding something that, number one, the guy feels comfortable with and confident that when he throws it, it's not going to just do something completely crazy when it comes out of his hand. So obviously it starts in throwing program. You take that to the bullpen, but then ultimately back then, like you're saying, we didn't have Rapsodo, we didn't have TrackMan Portable, we didn't have TrackMan on the game, so we didn't necessarily know, okay, we're getting the horizontal break that we're looking for. So we really had to kind of let the hitters tell us whether it was going to be a successful pitch or not. And I think that was the big thing was, the same thing that we were doing in the spring of looking at our usage and charts and what's successful and what's not successful, is we tried to do that same thing in the fall. And that would kind of tell us whether we were moving the right direction or not, of, hey, we need a little more horizontal break, we need a little less horizontal break, but maybe we can throw it a little bit harder, or we actually need a little more depth to it. We need to be able to get it down on plate a little more consistently. And that was kind of just marrying the process of, understanding what I was wanting them to do, taking it to the throwing program to train it, taking it to the bullpen to train it, but then trusting it once they got out there on the game mound, whether it was an inter-squad or once we get to the spring, we're playing, real competition of, buying into, yes, I can throw this, I'm going to trust it, have confidence in it. But then we always would try to go back and make sure that, the results were, being able to at least marry a little bit with what our overall goal was in the meantime. Do we need to make a big adjustment, a small adjustment, or do we just need to continue, the direction we were already moving? So, we kind of had to let the game tell us whether it was working or not versus, the way things kind of are now with you've got all the data and the technology.
So that was kind of the next thing I wanted to ask you, is whether or not you still use any of those tools that you used back in 2012, 2013, 2014. I mean, now you have incredible amounts of data, I'm sure, that tell you all that you need to know, but at some points, are you still doing the same sorts of things, like, hey, let's mess with this guy's grip a little bit, or mess with his pressure points, or try a new grip, or scrap this pitch and maybe add this pitch, or, just letting hitters tell you whether or not this, okay, despite what the numbers are saying, despite what the analytics say, we need to do something different with this pitch or scrap it altogether. I mean, at any point, are you still able to do that with the tech that you have today, Graham, or do you need to do that? Is that something you still like to do? Is that still a part of your world as a pitching coach right now?
Yeah, we definitely do that a lot. You try to be maybe a little more patient with it now, because in the minor leagues there isn't so much pressure to win the game. that's probably the biggest difference between playing at the college level and then the minor league level is, I never want to say the wins and losses don't matter, because you need to never lose that will to compete and get out there, because ultimately what you're doing in the minor league level is you're trying to get to a level at the big leagues where literally the only thing that matters is whether you win or lose. But yeah, we probably don't do quite as much like tinkering, I guess, is what I did at Morehead State, because it's a lot. Basically, I'm doing the same thing that I did at Morehead State, but the Astros have kind of created some way easier ways to track whether we're progressing in the direction we want to, make a small tweak to try to make continue to progress in the way that we want to, or do we need to make a wholesale change because we're not even close to where we want to be, and it's been too long. We don't have enough time to continue down this road, I guess. So, yeah, I would say I'm virtually the same coach. I just get to work, probably with just, a deeper staff overall. Some of the most talented pitchers on this planet. And then the system that we have makes it a lot easier to, really for me to see, but then it's easier to bring that guy, that specific guy in and help show him, okay, this is what's happening, but this is what we want to have happen. Okay. And then here's the adjustment that we have to make to get from where we are to where we currently want to be. Just the process is a lot more streamlined now than it was when I was in, 2014, 2015 at Morehead State, trying to kind of do it all on my own.
So when I was at Morehead, you helped me a lot figuring out some deeper statistics, some saber metrics that were important, and I wanted that for a different reason than you did. I wanted it for recruiting purposes. So at that time, I was the recruiting coordinator. Graham was the pitching coach, and I wanted to find a way to look at junior college statistics and statistically pick out which guy on our radar was the next one I needed to see. That was something that I wanted to do in my second year there. So Graham and I had a conversation just about, okay, more than ERA, more than batting average, what stats can I look at with what's available at the junior college level? Of course, they don't show these stats online, maybe the deeper statistics, but by looking at their at-bats, their hits, their extra base hits, for a hitter, for pitchers, their innings pitched, strikeouts, home runs allowed. Like, what can I look at here to tell me what I need to know about these guys? And Graham was really instrumental with helping me with that. So right now, you mentioned to me earlier that you're not much of an ERA guy. That stat doesn't mean a whole lot to you. What are stats that mean something to you now? Like, what stats now as a coach in pro ball, what stats are actually important to you? And if you were a college coach today, or even a high school coach today, like, what stats would you actually pay attention to that you think are relevant, mean something, that are worth talking about and worth looking at?
Yeah. So I think the big one, when just getting back to what you're talking about, when we were working, I think FIP, the fielding independent pitching, was kind of the big thing we were looking at. I was really into that at that specific time. And it kind of helps you maybe find some of your pitchers that, you're maybe starting to lose faith on a little bit, but it kind of takes some of the luck out of that can play into the ERA. There's some flaws in FIP, but it was something that we were interested in at the time. But to me, the big one's always going to be Ks, walks, and then the difference between them in pitching. I think that's the thing that you can ultimately figure out, how in control of the game is this particular pitcher. I think that's going to tell you as much as anything. If you go on Fangraphs and look up the leaders in, strikeout percentage minus walk percentage, and look at the top 50, it's the best 50 pitchers in baseball every single time. So if you're going to break it down to the simplest version, I think that's definitely where you'd go with that. It's just look at the Ks percentage, look at the walk percentage, and then marry the two, and basically all you have to do is subtract them. And I'd say almost always it will kind of tell you who your best pitchers are. In that regard, that's, if you want to break it down to one simple thing, that's the route I would go.
So I want to talk about just kind of what you're doing day to day now, when you are actually with pitchers, which it's been a long time. When you actually get your pitchers, when you see your guys, the guys that are ultimately going to be on your team, let's talk a little about what the day to day is like. So let's talk about bullpens. I want to talk about bullpens specifically. I think this stuff is really valuable. So let's start with a starting pitcher first. I'm guessing that your guys are on 5-day rotations, like a big league rotation, which is different than a 7-day rotation that you have in college. Can you kind of talk about what a starting pitcher's 5 days are like, and maybe just touch a little bit on like what kind of bullpens they're throwing, maybe how many pitches with what intent, things like that, and just kind of like in the days they're not throwing bullpens, like what are they doing? So day 1 they started, days 2, 3, 4, and 5. What does that look like for your guys, Graham?
Gotcha. And just to give a little bit of background, from Double-A down with our starting pitchers, this is going to sound weird. We have an 8-man rotation, but it's not an 8-man rotation. We use the tandem system. So, which, a lot of minor league teams do. But basically it means we have 2 starters in each game where one guy's actually making the start. And then there's another guy who is technically a starting pitcher, but he's going to throw an extended relief outing in that same game. So we call him a back-end guy. And then it's going to flip-flop the next time their turn comes up in the rotation. And then it gets a little confusing, but the easiest way to explain it is every 2 times they make a start or a back-end outing, then they'll get a solo start. So they do get some starts where it's just their game as well. But that's what kind of makes it able to kind of rotate on the same process as like a big league rotation would start. It can get a little confusing, but hopefully I've explained it the easiest way. So they start, and this is where I think it's really changed to where, a lot of routines back in the day kind of would have been simple, and I kind of did this at Morehead State to where every guy kind of had like a very similar routine. But it's really going to come down to the guy. So, they make their starter, they make their back end outing. Day 1 the next day, we have a decent amount of guys who either throw really light or maybe even don't throw periodically the next day. And especially as we kind of get into, the dog days of the summer and the long season, they definitely take advantage of that, of being able to take a really, really light day or just not even throw that day. But most guys like to get their arm moving at least a little bit, especially because the guys, and then I guess if day 2 is the day after the start, day 3 or day 4, they've kind of got their choice of when they want to throw a side or a light side on one of those particular days. We don't have anybody that won't throw a side, at least that I've worked with. Everybody will get on the mound, at least in some capacity. But there are pitchers out there that, they feel comfortable enough with their stuff that they don't throw sides in between outings. But most of the guys, if not all the guys that I've worked with, are throwing, their side or light side on that day 3 or day 4. Then day 5, it's going to be kind of a medium intent day, but more skill specific. Just they might work out a little bit, but they're going to be doing a lot of their throwing at the end after they come in and they get 60 feet. And it's going to be a decent amount of delivery work, and then maybe a specific focus of one particular pitch. They'll work through all their pitches, but there's going to be a focus on one of those pitches. And then obviously the day after that is going to be another game outing. Sliding back to the sides. So a light side is going to be anywhere from 15 to 20. I mean, they may bump over 20 just a little bit. A lot of times that's basically going to be determined on how they feel coming off the outing, and then how many days they have leading up to the next outing. And that is as simple as me just having a conversation, prior to the workout with them for that particular day of like, hey, how we feeling today? You thinking light side versus side? If you want to go full side, this is kind of what I'm thinking. How do you feel about that? If you want to go light side, we may switch gears a little bit. Full side is going to be anywhere between 25 and 35 pitches. Some guys like to, if they get in that 35, they might want to they may throw 20. with a specific focus, take a little bit of a breather, and then throw those last 10 to 15, and maybe like shift their focus if they're wanting. Maybe they're working on 2 development pieces at the same time. Intent level is very much in pro ball a case by case basis. We have plenty of guys who like they're throwing almost game like to the point where it almost makes you a little bit like nervous at times. But there's other guys who, if they throw from 90 to 95, they're probably throwing 80 to 83 miles per hour in their bullpen. So intent is a very case by case basis, and you just try to kind of be there to help guys understand, is their process hurting or helping their development? So that's kind of where I really step in, is try to be hyper aware of each guy, what they want to do from an individual routine, but then try to, once we've gone one time through that routine, try to make sure you're making critiques to help them understand of, hey, this is the issue that we ran into the game. We may be getting too much work. You're kind of running out of gas, pitches, 75 through 90. So maybe we need to back off the midweek work a little bit. But then there also could be the other end of the spectrum. I would say that's probably where like the majority of my time is spent, of trying to help guys build and develop their routine in between. So it can shift a lot throughout the course of the year. Sorry, that was a very long-winded answer, but hopefully I kind of answered the question.
No, it's great. I mean, that's something that I like to talk about. I like to hear what guys have to say about that, because as you know, I don't know much about the pitching side of things, and I like to hear how people structure, and especially when it comes to making things individual for guys when they have their side sessions, the intent, the number of pitches, things like that. Those are all things that I'm glad I'm not in a position to have to make that decision, and I completely respect guys that are in that position. When you talked about like intent and goals for different guys, can you just kind of talk about what are some typical things that guys will be working on in their bullpen? Is it things in their delivery that they want to kind of fine tune, or felt like maybe it was getting away from them a little bit? Is it they didn't feel like they had this pitch last time out, so they really want to focus on just that pitch and throwing one particular pitch? What are some examples of what guys are working on in these side sessions?
Gotcha. So, to me, that was the biggest adjustment that I had to make as a coach, going from low A to double A within a year of, like, in low A, it was just all physical skills, like a lot of delivery work, pitch shapes and that type of stuff. That was 95% of the work. In low A. In double A, that's where it really switched to where, a lot of times their pitch shapes are what they are, their velocity is what it is, their delivery is what it is. You're still trying to make some small tweaks, but the big shift is shifting the bullpens in double A to, try to center it a little more towards attack plans and game plans in double A. So you make sure that you hit on, if they've got a delivery segment, that we hit on that in the bullpen. If they've got a pitch that we're really trying to focus on and develop, we hit on that. But we also try to make sure that we understand, how we want to be able to tweak our attack plans. So you structure it a little bit more along those lines in double A, to where, like I said, in low A, it was, we were either almost always completely focused on the delivery, or there was a delivery piece along with a pitch development piece. And then that's kind of where it ended, because they weren't ready, from a physical standpoint, to be able to move on to the mental standpoint, which is kind of how I view attack plans and game plans and strategies and stuff like that. So there's a pretty big gap in double A from low A, and where in double A, it's there's physical, but it's much more mental, to where in low A there was very little mental, but there was tons of physical things that we had to work on.
When you talk about attack plans, is that preparing for the next team and specifically how you're going to attack them, or is that dealing with like pitch sequences and like this, for a right-handed hitter, this is usually a good pitch sequence for you, and for a left-handed hitter, this is how we're going to go after him? Like, what exactly does that mean for you?
So both. just trying to. We definitely are aware of who the next, who the next start is against, and some guys would get a specific of like, hey, last 15 pitches we're going to do 3 batters. It's going to be, take. Trying to think of a decent team to, like, say we're playing the Mariners affiliate, and next one's going to be Evan White, and how am I forgetting? Donnie Walton is their second base, and Lewis. We're going to get right there. So we get 2 righties and a lefty. We'll right, left, right, and then he would actually take the catcher through his thought process and his sequence. Like, some guys will get super detailed with it. Other guys are going to be like, hey, this team that I'm facing next, like, they've got they've got 6 lefties in the lineup, so I really want to focus. We're going to do 4 hitters, but I want them all to be lefties. Like, I feel like I can handle the righties, but I want to make sure that I'm getting some extra work on my attack plans with lefties. It could be a specific of okay, as a team, they swing on curveball down a lot and fastball up a lot, but they don't change. I want to work on that specific, portion of it. Like, our guys got really good at the end of the season of, like, understanding who they're facing and then being able to, take their attack plans from their last outing against that team, see the adjustments they wanted to make, try to execute it in the bullpen, but just almost have that trial run of what they were going to try to do once they got into the game the next time. But it really comes down to trying to exploit the pitcher's individual strengths and seeing where they match up with the hitter's individual weaknesses is what it, comes down to most of the time.
So even in Double-A, I mean, you have an idea of the specific hitters that you're going to face, and there might be, of course, they're probably not all 9 guys in the lineup. You don't know who they're, or you're maybe not concerned with them, but like the dudes in the middle of the lineup, like you will set specific attack plans for those guys at the Double-A level.
Yeah, for the most part, yeah. A lot of times, there's probably going to be 1 to 3 hitters where you watch the film, you look at the data, you do everything, and the pitcher's doing the same thing, and you're kind of like, all right, if we pitch to our strengths and we execute pitches, we're probably the odds are heavily in our favor against these 3 guys. So it's the other 6 guys in the lineup that you're going to do a little more extensive work, and then there's probably going to be a guy or 2 that you're kind of saying to yourself, like, not careful, but I'm not going to let this particular guy beat me. But also at the same time, those guys have to realize is those 1 or 2 guys that you're talking about, those are the 1 or 2 guys that you've got. There's going to be a lineup full of those guys at the level that you're ultimately trying to get to. You know what I mean? So it's like there is a fine line of, like, being careful and not wanting to get beat in that particular game. But you also have to figure out how to get those guys out consistently, because those are going to be the guys that are probably going to be at the level that, you are aspiring to be at. So there was a little bit of a fine line of where you kind of had to nudge guys at times of, like, hey, like, that's an opportunity where he hits a solo home run right there. That's not the end of the world. That's not hurting us. That's not killing your ERA. That's not putting, the team in a bad position. Like, let's attack. Let's attack right there, and let's pitch to our strengths and see what we can do, because that's the guy that he's going to tell you whether you're progressing the right way or not. You know what I mean? It's those 1, 2, 3 guys in the lineup that are more than likely future big leaguers. They're going to give you the information that you ultimately need. You know what I mean? Like, we can give them all the data and the technology and everything, but at the end of the day, the game is going to tell you whether you're good enough or not to do it at some point. So there was those moments of, like, hey, like, these are the 3 guys that we have to learn how to get out, and not only get out, we have to get them out consistently. So let's make sure that, we're not just, pitching around those guys to try to get the other 6 guys out, because that's not helping you get to the big leagues. It's helping your numbers, yeah, probably, but it's not helping you become a big league pitcher. So you did have to be aware of that a little bit.
I was curious about that because I had recorded a podcast not long ago with a coach in the Dodgers organization who's on the hitting side of things, and basically he was at one point he was coaching third base. He gave a guy who was a future big leaguer a take sign, or a potential future big leaguer a take sign in a 3-0 count, and it was this situation like the game situation. If you're in college and like just winning this game is what's most important, and not embarrassing the other team or whatever. Like it was a clear opportunity to give a take sign. But in this case, he got called after the game by, someone higher up that said, "Hey, did you give the take there?" "Yeah, I gave a take sign. I just thought the game situation called for it." And basically, he was told don't do that again with that hitter. And it was like, okay, message received. And I was kind of wondering if it's the same thing with pitchers, that they are, do your pitchers, especially the guys that have the brightest futures, do they kind of get told, or you sort of help them to understand that, despite the fact that you might want to pitch around this guy, like this is the guy you need to get out if you want to prove that you should be, moved up and ultimately if you're going to be a future major leaguer. Like when guys get called up from various levels, is that taken into account at all? Like what they have done against other highly ranked prospects as opposed to their overall numbers? Do you think it has anything to do with it, or do you ever have to have conversations with guys because of conversations you have with someone higher up, like, hey, so-and-so looks like they might have pitched around some of those middle of the lineup guys, and like we really need them to go after that guy and see what he can do? Like, is that ever a conversation on your end, and do you think that has anything to do with call-ups?
I won't say that it never has anything to do with call-ups. It probably is a consideration, but ultimately it comes down to, is the guy being challenged by the level or not? When it comes to the call-ups, I would say that's probably at least 75% of them is the guy needs a new challenge. Obviously, there's age and other considerations and a lot of other things that go into it, but I would say the overwhelming majority just comes down to, like, is he owning the level, or is he not owning the level? And if he is, all right, let's push him. Like, he needs to go and see if he can continue this at the next level, because, there's nothing really more for him to accomplish at the level that he's currently at. I would say that's probably the majority of what it comes down to. And, what we were talking about, like, I probably should have phrased it a little bit different. What I was just talking about, like, that doesn't happen that often. Because there's more times where I have to probably remind a guy not to just completely go out like, hey, we can't just groove fastballs right here to this pitch, because 9 times out of 10, the guy on the mound is uber competitive. You know what I mean? The last thing he wants to do is pitch around a guy. It's more something that, like, I just have to be aware of as a coach to make sure we're not falling into that pitfall of pitching around guys too often, because you do want them to learn that skill a little bit, because they are at times going to be asked to do that in the big league. So, hey, don't let this guy beat us, because this win really does matter. So they do have to learn that skill, but it's just trying to find that right marriage of learning how to do it, but, like, not making it a habit of every time he comes up, all right, I'm not letting this guy hurt me. Like, I'm just going to completely pitch around him. I'm going to go strike the next guy out. So, like I said, I don't think it happens a whole lot. It's just something to kind of be mindful of as a coach at the minor league level. And I don't think it has too much to do with call-ups.
Graham, talking about just pitch sequencing and calling pitches, I know that, in college, I think the vast majority of pitching coaches call pitches in college. And I don't know if they're, at least to my knowledge, not that I've ever been to this level, but to the extent of my knowledge, every pro organization at every level, the catchers, well, pitchers and catchers combined, are calling pitches. Especially at the low A level, how much conversation do you have to have with guys about pitch sequencing, and this is why maybe you should not have thrown this pitch here, or I think you'd have been better off going with this pitch here because of that? How much is that part of the learning process, or is that really is that a conversation more to have with catchers than pitchers? Like, are your pitchers kind of taught to just trust the catchers and just nod yes, or are you trying to teach them how to sequence as well, and like why this pitch is the right pitch in this situation? Just curious about that, because especially your college guys that get drafted as juniors, they've gone 21 years of their life without necessarily deciding what pitch to throw. In a lot of cases, just kind of curious how that goes on the pro side of things.
Yeah, so the shortest answer to that question is like that's every day. Like that's ultimately kind of the meat and potatoes of what we're trying to do. And the big thing is using the data and using the technology to help them understand what their best pitches are. Okay, and what are the pitches that need to get better to be on par with their best pitches, and then how do they do that? And helping them understand why their pitches are good. Their pitches that are already strengths for them, help them understand why, and then how they can use them in different ways to attack hitters specifically. So it's more so just helping them understand what are their put-away weapons, and then helping them understand, okay, particular situations to where, like, I need to go to my put-away weapons right away because I don't want this ball put in play. You know, it's runner on third, less than 2 outs. Like, I need a puncher right here, understanding that situation. And then helping them understand what are the pitches that give them the best opportunity to get the result that they're looking for. It's like, even if they do it perfectly, there's not a guarantee. So it's like you explain, it's like, I don't want you to do this the exact way I'm telling you to do, and then you give up a bloop single over the second baseman. Like, I don't want to see a look in the dugout of hey, I did exactly what you didn't work. It's like, it's baseball, man. But that's ultimately what it comes down to is, like, it's crazy to me, and it probably does come down to, a lot of college programs calling the game, and then there's limited amount of time, especially at the NCAA Division I level, that you can actually coach the player. So it's not like you're going to use a significant amount of your practice time or time that you can actually work with that player to, like, sit down and break down why you call pitches the way you do, or in particular for him, you just ask him to kind of trust you rather than understand it. But it's kind of interesting, like, how many guys come to us and they probably really don't know what their best pitch is. So helping them understand what their best pitch is, why it is their best pitch, and then how to use it is kind of like the day in, day out goal.
And when you're talking to guys about their best pitch, just to wrap this up, I have a couple of questions that are probably dumb questions, but to help a guy understand what his best pitch is, are you essentially looking at data and saying, hey, man, against this pitch, this is what happens. This is the batting average against, this is the slugging percentage against, this is how often you give up home runs against this pitch, whereas this pitch, these are the numbers. Is there anything more to it than that? I mean, is anything like, spin rate, vertical break, is anything like that important when it comes to teaching a guy what his best pitch is, or just flat out like, this is what happens against this pitch?
Yeah, I think the big thing is the results, like you're saying, but you've got to be a little bit wary of that, because there are players who are savvy enough to be like, well, I'm pitching against rookie ball guys right now, or I'm pitching against low A guys right now. Like, there might be, 5 big leaguers in this whole league. There's probably a lot more than that. I think you get where I'm going with that. They realize that they're not facing a big league lineup, but they realize that that's the carrot at the end that they're chasing. So you do have to be wary. I think when it comes to that, you just try to draw connections of, like, hey, like, I'm trying to think of Justin Verlander, like, this type of fastball, like, when you do this, like, the way it does what it does, or how you throw it, like, it's very similar to Justin Verlander's. Okay? Justin Verlander's fastball performs pretty darn well at the big league level. So odds are high, like, what we're telling you to do. I'm trying to think of the simplest way to explain it. But, like, drawing connections with guys who are at or have been at the big league level, like, connecting their pitches to that big leaguer's pitches, and helping them understand, like, yes, it's performing now, and it will more than likely continue to perform as long as we continue down this path that we're on. I think that's, you kind of got to, hit them from both ways on that.
So here's an even dumber question, and you can defer this one if you'd like to. But as a suffering Pirates fan, as you know, we just traded Joe Musgrove to the Padres. And with Joe Musgrove, I'll use him as an example. He had a much more successful 2020 than he had previous years, because in the past his fastball has gotten hammered His slider has been very successful, but there were too many fastballs. So the overall numbers just weren't as good as they could be. This past year, he added a curveball, which was a very high spin rate curveball, got a lot of swings and misses, and it was almost like, he added another weapon that people couldn't hit, so he threw his fastball less, threw his curveball more, threw his slider more. The fastball still had similar numbers against it, but he threw it less, so the overall numbers were better. If you're a guy like that, Graham, because, I guess the sort of the revolution of baseball now and what the Astros sort of started, probably within a couple years of you getting there, basically if this pitch is getting hit a lot, stop throwing it. And why that took so long for people to figure out, I don't know, but it was, baseball has always been sort of like establish your fastball. And now a lot of organizations are seeing, well, the fastball gets hammered and the slider doesn't, so we're going to throw the fastball a lot less. That's the Garrett Cole story, leaving the Pirates, going to the Astros. And I know that, other teams around baseball are catching up to that. If you are that guy, which I'm assuming a lot of pitchers are that way, that their fastball gets hit the most, has the worst, numbers against, or the highest offensive numbers against, and this one or multiple secondary pitches have a lot lower offensive numbers against it. When are you supposed to throw the fastball, or when are you supposed to feel good about throwing the fastball, or confident about throwing that fastball that gets hit at a 3-something clip with a slugging percentage of a 4-something or 500 clip, whereas your slider rarely gets put in play? How do you what's, again, I know this is probably just a super dumb question, but when would I want to throw the fastball if that's the case? Obviously I'm assuming you need to throw it at some point, right? Or to get guys off of the slider, but how often and what situations are you teaching guys, these minor league guys who are preparing to go into the big leagues, okay, you have 4 pitches, your fastball gets hit the most out of all of these, but we still need to throw it sometimes. Again, maybe a dumb question. You can simplify it or just not answer it altogether if you want. But it's just a question that I have. If you're a Joe Musgrove, when would I even want to throw my fastball? What's the point of that?
Yeah, I think, there's a lot of things to answer. It's basically what I was talking about earlier at Morehead State. It's all right, we're just, we're kind of we're still going to throw the fastball, but we're going to throw a heck of a lot less of it. That's kind of what we did at Morehead State is exactly what you're describing with Joe Musgrove there. But I think there's a lot of different ways you can go with it. Is you can still use it as a, there's still guys where it's almost they go reverse to where you were trying to set up the off speed is where you try to set up your fastball in particular ways, and that's basically what you're doing by using more off speed. But I think the other thing that you can probably look at it is you don't be careful, you still be aggressive, but you be aggressive to locations where that guy doesn't tend to do his damage. Or when you do get it there as a pitcher, looking at your location charts, hey, my fastball gets hammered overall, but when I put it in this 1 or 2 spots consistently, it doesn't get hammered there. That's something that you've got to kind of look at. Am I able to use maybe a little bit of a different strategy with my location? As I've already done it with my usage. All right, I've switched my usage strategy. Is there an opportunity, with my location strategy to do something a little bit different? Because, like you said, I don't want to just throw off speed. I want to be able to, get outs with my fastball. When I get outs with my fastball, where do they come from?
I like that explanation, and I know obviously you have to throw a fastball at some points, but what's sort of the line, I guess, and I like the different using different locations and figuring out, obviously in this quadrant it doesn't get hit as much as this one, and it's just a matter of executing there. But sorry for the dumb questions at the end, Graham, but I appreciate all this, man. It's been a fun conversation. This is Graham Johnson, everybody. He's the pitching coach for the Double-A team in the Houston Astros organization, or is expected to be in 2021. And Graham, I appreciate you being here, man, and taking this time. I know you're leaving tomorrow for spring training, so taking this time today has been awesome, and I very much appreciate it, and it's been great catching up with you.
Absolutely, I appreciate you having me on, and hopefully, I gave somebody at least something fun to listen to, or maybe answered a couple questions that they had. But I appreciate the time, Jeff.